For decades, the six-figure salary was the golden ticket. It was the cultural shorthand for making it, the numeric threshold that separated the struggling class from the comfortable class. If you hit $100,000 a year, the social contract promised you a specific life. A detached home with a yard, a new car every few years, an annual vacation, and a rapidly growing 401k. It was the finish line of the American dream. But for the millennial generation, that finish line has been moved. It has been dismantled, repainted, and placed 10 miles further down a road that is currently on fire. The psychological dissonance of the modern economy lies in this specific, maddening reality. You can do everything right, get the degree, land the prestige job, hit the coveted six-figure mark, and still find yourself checking your bank account with a sense of dread 3 days before payday. We are witnessing the rise of a demographic anomaly that economists have dubbed the Henry, high earners not rich yet. This isn't a paradox. It is a mathematical inevitability born from a fundamental decoupling of wages and purchasing power. To understand why a 32-year-old marketing director in New York, London, or Toronto earning $120,000 feels poor, we have to strip away the judgment and look at the raw arithmetic of survival in the 2020s. The six-figure lie begins with the gross-to-net hallucination. When a boomer hit this salary milestone in 1990, $100,000 had the purchasing power of nearly $245,000 today. Back then it was wealth. Today it is barely middle-class maintenance. When that paycheck hits the account of a modern millennial, the silent partners take their cut immediately. Federal taxes, state or provincial taxes, and Social Security deductions strip that impressive-sounding number down to a manageable, yet underwhelming reality. But the erosion hasn't even truly begun yet. The first major predator of millennial wealth is the cost of shelter. In major metropolitan hubs where the high-paying jobs are strictly concentrated, rent has not just risen. It has mutated. We are seeing rent-to-income ratios that would have been considered predatory lending a generation ago now normalized as market rate. A single professional paying $3,000 to $4,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment isn't living in luxury. They are paying a subscription fee to access the labor market. This is the location tax of the modern economy. To earn the high salary, you must live where the salary is paid, but the cost of living there devours the premium you earned in the first place. This creates a liquidity trap. On paper, the millennial looks successful. Their LinkedIn profile screams achievement. But their cash flow is hemorrhaging. Unlike previous generations who could move to the suburbs for cheaper housing, the modern housing market has nationalized inflation. The starter home, a modest 1,200 square foot box that was the bedrock of boomer wealth accumulation, has effectively gone extinct. It has been replaced by luxury condos with HOA fees or sprawling exurban developments that require 2 hours of commuting, adding a psychological tax that doesn't show up on a spreadsheet but burns out the worker nonetheless. Then we must address the debt anchor. This is the unique, defining scar of the millennial cohort. We were the first generation to be sold education as a mortgage-backed security. A boomer could pay for a semester of college with a summer job painting fences. A millennial enters the workforce with a negative net worth equivalent to a luxury car, but with an interest rate that ensures the principal barely moves for the first decade of repayment. When you are earning $110,000 but sending $800 a month to service student loans, you aren't earning six figures. You are earning a survival wage while servicing the debt incurred to get the job that pays you the survival wage. It is a circular economic firing squad. Critics, often from older generations, love to point to lifestyle creep. The avocado toast argument. The idea that millennials are broke because they buy $7 lattes and subscribe to too many streaming services. This is not just lazy analysis. It is statistically illiterate. The cost of discretionary goods, electronics, clothes, food, has actually remained relatively stable or dropped relative to inflation. The lifestyle creep that is bankrupting high-earning millennials isn't about luxury. It's about the explosion of non-negotiable essentials. Childcare is the silent killer of the upper-middle-class dream. For a dual-income millennial couple, daycare costs can easily rival or exceed their mortgage. We are talking about $2,000 to $3,000 per child per month. This isn't lifestyle. This is the ransom you pay to be allowed to go to work. If one parent stays home, the household income is halved, and they fall out of the middle class. If both work, a massive chunk of that second salary is incinerated immediately by childcare costs. The system is designed to extract maximum efficiency from the worker, while offloading the entire cost of social reproduction onto the household balance sheet. Furthermore, we see the complete collapse of the third places and community support systems that used to subsidize daily life. Grandparents are often working longer or living in different states, meaning free childcare is gone. Public transport in many high-income areas is broken or non-existent, necessitating the ownership of a car, which carries its own exploding costs of insurance, gas, and maintenance. Every aspect of life that used to be communal or cheap has been financialized and turned into a monthly bill. The high-earning millennial is not a citizen. They are a walking bundle of subscription services and debt obligations. The emotional toll of this is a specific type of burnout known as status anxiety. You are surrounded by the signifiers of wealth, fancy offices, expensive cities, the digital projection of success, but you lack the capital to actually secure your future. You are asset poor but income rich, a precarious position that means if you lose that job for 3 months, the entire house of cards collapses. There is no cushion. The savings rate for high earners has plummeted not because they lack discipline, but because the margin of error in the modern economy has vanished. One medical emergency, one layoff, one unexpected rent hike, and the six-figure earner is spiraling into debt. This is why we see high earners relying on credit cards to bridge the gap at the end of the month. It seems insane to an outside observer. How can someone making $10,000 a month carry a balance? But when fixed costs, housing, debt, childcare, insurance, taxes, consume 90% of that net income, the slightest deviation in spending necessitates credit. It is a treadmill that is slowly speeding up, forcing the runner to sprint just to stay in the same place. The promise was that if you ran hard enough, you'd eventually reach a place of rest. The reality is that the treadmill is connected to a generator that powers an economy designed to keep you running until you collapse. The tragedy isn't just the lack of money. It's the betrayal of expectation. We were trained to run a race that ended 20 years ago, and we are only now realizing that the prize money was spent before we even put on our running shoes. To find the thief who stole the prize money, we have to travel back to a specific inflection point where the logic of the global economy was quietly rewritten. This wasn't a natural disaster or an inevitable evolution. It was a deliberate architectural redesign of wealth distribution. If you look at the charts, the moment of betrayal is clearly visible. It's the great decoupling of the early 1970s and accelerating through the 1980s. Before this period, as workers became more productive, producing more widgets, closing more deals, writing more code, their wages rose in direct correlation. Productivity and compensation were married. But then the divorce was finalized. The surplus value created by the American worker stopped going into paychecks and started flowing exclusively into capital gains, stock buybacks, and executive compensation. The six-figure salary of today is a victim of this decoupling. In a fair system based on historical trends, a mid-level manager or senior engineer today shouldn't just be making $120,000. Adjusted for productivity growth, they should be commanding nearly double that. The struggle you feel is the gap between the value you generate and the value you are allowed to keep. This extraction mechanism is enforced by the doctrine of shareholder primacy, the idea that a company's only moral obligation is to its stock price, not its employees or the community. This philosophy justified the stripping of pensions, the stagnation of benefits, and the reliance on a lean workforce where one millennial is expected to do the job of three boomers for the price of one. Vive. But the suppression of wages is only one arm of the pincer movement. The other arm is the deliberate manipulation of how we measure the cost of living. We are being gaslit by the Consumer Price Index, CPI. The government tells you inflation is cooling or hovering around 3%, but you feel like you're drowning. This is because the CPI is heavily weighted towards cheap, mass-produced consumer goods, flat-screen TVs, fast fashion, and processed food. It ignores or drastically underweights the specific asset classes that define a middle-class life: housing, higher education, and quality healthcare. These sectors haven't just experienced inflation. They have experienced hyperinflation. The system has successfully made survival cheap but thriving impossible. You can buy a 4K television for $300, but the tuition required to get the job to buy that TV has risen by 169% since 1980. This is the bifurcation of the economy. We have deflation in distractions and hyperinflation in necessities. The high-earning millennial is trapped in the latter category, spending the vast majority of their income on the very things the government conveniently excludes from its core inflation narrative to keep interest rates artificially manageable. Furthermore, we must confront the financialization of the housing market. In the previous century, a house was primarily a place to live, with a secondary benefit of slow appreciation. Today, residential real estate has been transformed into a high-yield asset class for global capital. Institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds, and private equity firms have entered the single-family home market with algorithms designed to outbid human beings. When a millennial tries to buy a home, they aren't just bidding against another family. They are bidding against a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund that sees that property as a yield-bearing unit on a spreadsheet. This artificial scarcity is manufactured. The supply chain issues we hear about are often a smokescreen for monopoly power. In key industries, food production, energy, telecommunications, we have allowed massive consolidation. When three companies control 80% of a market, they don't need to compete on price. They can coordinate price hikes under the guise of inflation. This is greedflation. Corporate profits have hit record highs at the exact same moment that high earners are feeling the tightest squeeze. We also have to analyze the systemic predator that is the modern university system. Higher education has morphed into a gatekeeping industry that charges exorbitant tolls for entry into the corporate world. Universities have bloated their administrative classes, built resort-like facilities to attract customers, and passed the bill to 18-year-olds backed by non-dischargeable government loans. This created a moral hazard. Universities could charge whatever they wanted because the government guaranteed the loans. The result is a generation of high earners who are essentially indentured servants to the Department of Education. The degree is the new company store. You need it to work, but paying for it ensures you never truly own your labor. This economic architecture is reinforced by a tax code that punishes income while rewarding capital. The high-earning millennial, the doctor, the lawyer, the engineer, pays the highest marginal tax rates because their money comes from W-2 labor. Meanwhile, the truly wealthy, the asset owner class, pays significantly lower rates on capital gains. A millennial making $150,000 working 60 hours a week pays a higher percentage of their income in taxes than a billionaire living off stock dividends. The system is explicitly designed to prevent labor from becoming capital. It is a firewall meant to keep the working rich from becoming the owning rich. The precarity is the point. By keeping even high earners living paycheck to paycheck, the system ensures compliance. A worker with 2 years of savings is difficult to manage. They can quit, they can strike, they can demand better conditions. A worker who needs the next paycheck to cover the mortgage and the daycare bill is obedient. The golden handcuffs are no longer gold. They are made of debt and anxiety. This creates a workforce that is perpetually stressed, hyperproductive out of fear, and too exhausted to politically mobilize against the conditions of their servitude. We are living through the end stages of a debt supercycle where the growth of the economy is fueled almost entirely by credit expansion rather than real productivity. To keep the GDP line going up, the system requires you to consume more than you earn. The financial industry spends billions on algorithms and marketing psychology to normalize this leverage. They invented buy now, pay later for groceries. They normalized 84-month car loans. They turned credit limits into targets. The system relies on you failing to do the math. It relies on the illusion that cash flow equals wealth. But as we transition into the final part of this analysis, we have to look at where this trajectory leads. If the math doesn't work today, what happens when the artificial supports crumble? The future isn't just about being broke. It's about a fundamental restructuring of what it means to be a human being in an economy that views you as nothing more than a localized unit of debt service. This dehumanization is not a bug in the code. It is the operating system of the coming decade, and recognizing this is the first step toward any form of genuine liberation. We are barreling toward a bifurcation of society that will make the current class divides look quaint. The middle class as a historical concept is effectively dead. It was an anomaly of the post-war era, a temporary truce between capital and labor that has now expired. What replaces it is a stark binary, the asset-owning class and the subscription class. The high-earning millennial currently sits on the razor's edge between these two worlds, and the window to choose a side is rapidly closing.